Ambassador had seen many worlds in his long career with the Galactic Union. He had walked on frozen moons and scorching desert planets. He had negotiated treaties with species that breathed methane and others that lived in complete darkness. But nothing in his 200 years of diplomatic service had prepared him for the mission to Earth. The blue planet had appeared on Union scanners 50 years ago when humans first started sending radio signals into space. The science teams had immediately classified it as a Class 7, one of the most dangerous planetary environments capable of supporting life. Most species in the galaxy had evolved on gentle worlds with stable climates and calm atmospheres. Earth was not gentle. Earth was not calm. Earth was a violent, chaotic ball of rock and water that seemed determined to kill everything living on its surface. And yet something had survived there. Something had thrived there. Something had built cities and developed technology and was now reaching for the stars. Ship entered Earth's atmosphere on a warm Tuesday morning. He watched through the viewport as clouds swirled beneath him, massive formations of water vapor that could produce lightning, hail, and winds strong enough to destroy buildings. The humans called these formations weather. They talked about weather the way other species talked about breakfast, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. The landing site was a flat stretch of desert in a region the humans called Nevada. A small delegation waited near a cluster of temporary buildings, took a deep breath of filtered air and stepped out of his ship. The moment his feet touched Earth's soil, his environmental suit began screaming warnings. Oxygen levels were at 21%, high enough to make the atmosphere a fire hazard. Gravity was nearly twice what he was used to, pressing down on his thin body like an invisible weight. Radiation from the yellow sun poured through the atmosphere despite the protective ozone layer. The temperature was already climbing toward what the humans considered a pleasant afternoon. Captain Jack stepped forward to greet him. The human was tall and broad, with dark hair and an easy smile. Beside him stood Lieutenant Kate, a woman with sharp eyes and a translator device hanging from her belt, and Dr. Ben Harper, a scientist whose excited expression suggested he had been waiting for this moment his entire life. "Ambassador," Jack said, extending his hand in the human greeting gesture, "welcome to Earth. We're honored to have you here." Looked at the offered hand. He had read about this custom. Humans touched each other constantly as a form of social bonding. They shook hands, embraced, even pressed their lips together in a ritual called kissing. Physical contact that would be considered aggressive or inappropriate in most galactic cultures was perfectly normal to them. He reached out and grasped Jack's hand carefully. The human's grip was firm and warm. Could feel the strength in those fingers, the dense muscle and heavy bone that had evolved to survive on this crushing world. "Thank you, Captain," said through his translator. "I must confess, your planet is quite overwhelming." Kate laughed softly. "We get that a lot from off-world visitors. Is there anything we can do to make you more comfortable?" Glanced at his suit's readout. The temperature had risen 3 degrees in the last few minutes. In the distance, he could see dark clouds gathering on the horizon. His suit identified them as a potential thunderstorm, a violent electrical phenomenon that humans apparently found romantic. "I believe I will require some time to adjust," he said carefully. They walked toward the main building and tried not to stare at everything around him. Small creatures flew through the air on thin membranes, birds the humans called them, their hollow bones and efficient lungs allowing them to navigate the thick atmosphere with ease. Plants grew everywhere, green and hungry, converting the dangerous sunlight into energy through a process called photosynthesis. The ground itself was alive with insects, bacteria, and countless other organisms, all competing and cooperating in an endless cycle of death and renewal. Dr. Harper noticed his fascination, first time seeing Earth's biosphere up close. "I have studied your planet extensively," admitted, "but the reports do not capture the reality. Everything here is so aggressive, so alive." "That's one way to put it," Ben said with a grin. "Earth's ecosystem is pretty competitive. If you're not fighting to survive, something else is going to take your spot." They entered the building and felt some relief as the filtered air and controlled temperature wrapped around him. A conference room had been prepared with seats modified to accommodate his body structure. Refreshments were offered, though he politely declined when he learned that the brown liquid the humans were drinking contained a stimulant called caffeine that would have sent his heart into dangerous palpitations. "Shall we begin the preliminary discussions?" Jack asked, settling into his chair with the easy confidence of a predator at rest. Nodded and activated his recording device. This meeting would be studied by Union scientists and diplomats for generations, the first formal contact between the Galactic Union and the species from Earth. Over the next several hours, he learned things that made his blood run cold. Humans were not merely survivors of there, they were its apex predators. They had spread across every continent, adapted to every climate, and dominated every ecosystem they entered. They had survived ice ages that covered half their planet in frozen water. They had survived volcanic eruptions that blotted out the sun. They had survived plagues that killed millions of their kind. And they had done it all without genetic modification, without advanced technology, without any of the tools that other species had used to overcome their environmental challenges. They had done it with nothing but their stubborn refusal to die. "Your species has experienced 5 mass extinction events," said, reading from his notes. "Events that wiped out the majority of life on your planet. How did your ancestors survive?" Kate shrugged as if the question was barely worth considering. "We're adaptable. When things got hard, we found new ways to live. Built shelters, made tools, worked together. That's just what humans do." Just what humans do. The phrase echoed in his mind as he retired to his quarters that evening. He stood at the window and watched the thunderstorm rolling across the desert, lightning splitting the sky and rain hammering the ground with enough force to strip flesh from bone. The humans outside barely glanced at it. Some of them were laughing, running through the rain as if it was a game. He composed his first report to the Galactic Council that night. He described the atmosphere, the gravity, the radiation, the predators, and the storms. He described the humans themselves, those strange, resilient creatures who had crawled out of the primordial chaos and conquered their world through sheer determination. His conclusion was simple. Earth is not merely it is a crucible that has forged something unprecedented. The humans are not victims of their environment. They are its children, shaped by its violence into something the galaxy has never seen before. I recommend extreme caution in all future dealings with this species. They are friendly now, but they carry the weight of extinction in their eyes. They have stared into the abyss of annihilation and emerged stronger. I do not know what they will become, but I know that the galaxy will never be the same. He sent the report and turned off the lights. Outside, the storm raged on, and somewhere in the darkness, the humans were already dreaming of the stars. Station floated at the edge of Union space like a metal flower blooming in the darkness. It was massive, home to nearly 10,000 beings from over 40 different species. Diplomats and traders and scientists all lived and worked within its spinning rings, creating a small pocket of civilization in the endless void between stars. The human embassy had been established on Ring 7 6 months after first contact. Commander Cole led the contingent of 50 humans who called the station home. He was a quiet man in his 40s with gray starting to show in his short brown hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of long years and difficult decisions. His team included Shaw, their chief engineer, a woman who could fix anything with enough duct tape and determination. Danny Brooks handled security, a former Marine who moved like a predator despite his friendly smile. Dr. Laura ran the medical bay with calm efficiency, treating everything from human colds to alien infections with equal competence. The other species on the station watched the humans with constant fascination. Stories had spread across the galaxy since first contact, stories that seemed too wild to be true. The humans came from a world where the very air could catch fire, They willingly consumed poisons for pleasure and called them coffee and alcohol. They kept predators in their homes and called them pets. They threw themselves out of flying vehicles for fun, trusting thin sheets of fabric to slow their fall. None of the other species quite knew what to make of them. The day everything changed started like any other. Was reviewing supply requests in his office when the alarms began to scream. Red lights flashed throughout the station as automated warnings blared in a dozen different languages. Hull breach in Sector 3, the station's computer announced. All personnel evacuate immediately. Was moving before the message finished. He grabbed his emergency kit and ran toward the command center, pushing through crowds of panicking aliens who were fleeing in the opposite direction. He found already at her console, her fingers flying across the controls. "What happened?" he demanded. "Micrometeorite punched through the outer hull," said without looking up. "Bad angle. It tore through 3 bulkheads before stopping. Sector 3 is venting atmosphere." "Casualties?" "Unknown. Communications are down in that section." Danny arrived seconds later, already pulling on his emergency suit. 3 of his security team were right behind him, their faces grim but determined. "We're going in," Danny said. It was not a question. Nodded, "Be careful." The security team moved through the station like ghosts, following emergency corridors that most species never used because the conditions inside were too dangerous. The temperature dropped as they approached the breach zone. Frost formed on their visors. Their suits worked overtime to keep them alive in an environment that was rapidly becoming lethal. They found the first. They were a crystalline species, beautiful beings with bodies made of living mineral that chimed softly when they moved. They were also incredibly fragile, unable to survive temperatures below freezing or pressures different from there. 12 of them were trapped in a conference room, their bodies already beginning to crack as the cold seeped through the failing walls. The door to their room was jammed. The emergency hydraulics had frozen solid, leaving no way to open it from the outside. "I need options," Danny said over his comm. "The manual release is on the inside," responded. "There's an access panel about 3 meters to the left of the door, but it's in the breach zone. Full vacuum." Danny looked at the gap between him and the panel. Open space. No atmosphere. Temperature approaching absolute zero. Any other species would have called for equipment, waited for a robotic solution, or simply accepted that they could not be saved. Danny pulled off his glove. His team shouted warnings, but he was already moving. He thrust his bare hand into the frozen void, feeling the cold bite into his flesh like fire in reverse. His fingers found the access panel, clumsy and slow as the nerves began to die. He triggered the manual release with 3 seconds to spare before frostbite would have become permanent. The door slid open. Heat rushed into the conference room as his team moved in, carrying the injured toward safety. Danny wrapped his blackened hand in emergency thermal cloth and kept directing the evacuation. His fingers had turned an ugly shade of purple. He would probably lose at least 2 of them. He did not seem to notice or care. The ambassador watched in stunned silence as the humans carried her people to safety. She had seen many things in her long life, but nothing like this. A being had just mutilated himself to save strangers. He had done it without hesitation, without complaint, as if sacrificing part of his body was simply the obvious choice. "Why?" she asked Danny as he passed her. "Why did you do that?" Danny paused and looked at her with tired eyes. "Because you needed help." "But your hand, you have permanently injured yourself." He glanced down at his damaged fingers and shrugged. "Frostbite heals, eventually, and even if it doesn't, I've got another hand. But you folks only get 1 life each. Seemed like a pretty easy trade." The evacuation took another hour. Coordinated from the command center, while work to seal the breach and Danny's team swept every room in the damaged sector. They found 2 more groups of survivors, a family of traders, and a young Ani scientist who had hidden in an air duct when the alarm started. By the time the emergency was over, the humans had saved 37 lives. They had done it by walking into conditions that would have killed any other species on the station. They had done it without being asked, without expecting reward, without even seeming to think it was particularly remarkable. That night, the station's medical bay was crowded with grateful aliens who wanted to thank the humans personally. Danny sat on an examination table while Doctor worked on his hand, muttering about idiots who thought they were invincible. "You're going to lose the 2 outer fingers," she told him. "The damage was too severe." Danny nodded. "Worth it. You know they make prosthetics now, very good ones." "Then I'll get prosthetics, still worth it." A elder approached them, her crystalline body chiming softly with each step. She bowed low before Danny, a gesture of profound respect in her culture. "We have heard stories about humans," she said. "We thought they were exaggerations, tales made larger in the telling, but now I have seen the truth with my own eyes." "What truth is that?" Danny asked. "You break," the elder said softly. "Like all living things, you break, but you do not stop. You lose pieces of yourselves and keep moving forward. You feel pain and fear and still you act. This is not courage as we understand it. This is something else entirely." Danny considered her words for a long moment. Then he smiled, just a little, the expression of someone who was too tired to explain the obvious. "We're human," he said simply. "This is what we do." The elder returned to her people, and the medical bay slowly emptied. Outside the viewport, the stars burned cold and eternal in the darkness. And somewhere on Ring 7, a man with a damaged hand and a clear conscience fell asleep knowing that 37 families would have breakfast together in the morning because he had made a choice. The galaxy was beginning to understand something about humans. They were not invincible. They were not fearless. They were not immune to pain or loss or death. But they had something that no other species seemed to possess. They had the absolute stubborn refusal to quit, no matter the cost, no matter the odds, no matter how much of themselves they had to sacrifice along the way. And that made them the most terrifying species the Union had ever encountered. The Ani scientific vessel landed in Montana on a crisp autumn morning. The trees had turned brilliant shades of red and gold, and the mountains in the distance were already capped with the first snow of the season. Dr. Wright waited at the landing site with a smile on her face and a thick jacket wrapped around her shoulders. The Ani were small furry beings about the size of human children. They had evolved on a low-gravity moon with a stable climate and no natural predators. Their large eyes gave them excellent vision, and their quick minds had made them one of the most scientifically advanced species in the galaxy. They had come to Earth to study its ecosystem, convinced that understanding them would unlock secrets about evolution and survival that could benefit all species. Lead researcher N was the first to emerge from the ship. He stood barely a meter tall, his brown fur rippling in the cold wind as he looked around at the alien landscape with undisguised wonder. "Dr. Wright," he said through his translator, "thank you for hosting our expedition." "Please call me, and it's our pleasure. We've set up a base camp near a wolf preserve. I think you'll find the wildlife quite interesting." The Ani team consisted of 12 researchers, all eager to observe Earth's legendary fauna in person. They had studied humans extensively, but the reports about other Earth species seemed almost impossible to believe. Predators that hunted in coordinated packs, prey animals that could run for hours without stopping, parasites that rewrote the behavior of their hosts, organisms that communicated through chemical signals spread across entire forests. The base camp was a collection of heated tents and monitoring equipment set up on a ridge overlooking a wide valley. Had arranged for local wildlife experts to join them, including a ranger named Sam who had spent 20 years studying the wolf packs in the region. "The pack we're tracking is about 2 kilometers north," Sam explained on their first morning. 7 adults and 4 juveniles. They've been hunting elk in this area for generations. We would like to observe a hunt, N said. Our records indicate that Earth predators use sophisticated pack tactics. Sam nodded and led them out into the field. They hiked for hours through terrain that exhausted the Ani despite their specialized equipment. The gravity was tolerable for them, but the distance and the cold pushed their small bodies to their limits. The humans seemed barely affected, walking with easy strides that ate up the ground. They found the wolf pack just after noon. The animals were resting in a clearing, their gray and brown fur blending with the dead grass around them. At the edge of the forest, a herd of elk grazed peacefully, seemingly unaware of the danger nearby. Now we wait, Sam said quietly. Wolves are patient hunters. They choose their moment carefully. The attack came 2 hours later. The wolves rose as one and began moving toward the elk herd, not running but walking steadily. The elk noticed them and began to flee, their powerful legs carrying them across the meadow in great bounding leaps. The wolves followed at a trot. N watched through his observation scope, waiting for the burst of speed that would end the chase. In every predator-prey interaction he had witnessed throughout the galaxy, there was a moment of explosive action. The hunter either caught its target quickly or gave up and looked for easier prey. The wolves kept trotting. 10 minutes passed. The elk were far ahead now, almost out of sight, but the wolves never stopped. They followed the scent trail with mechanical persistence, their tongues hanging from their mouths as they panted in the cool air. They are not catching up, N observed, confused. Why do they continue? Smiled grimly, just keep watching. An hour passed. The Ani team followed the chase using drones, their disbelief growing with every passing minute. The elk had slowed considerably, their initial burst of energy depleted. The wolves maintained their steady pace, neither faster nor slower than before. 2 hours. The elk were staggering now. One of them, an older female, had fallen behind the herd. Her legs trembled with exhaustion. Her sides heaved as she struggled to breathe. The wolves closed in. Persistence hunting, explained as the pack surrounded their prey. Wolves are endurance predators. So are humans. We evolved to chase our prey until it literally cannot run anymore. N stared at her with something like horror in his large eyes. You follow your prey until it collapses from exhaustion. For hours, sometimes days, our ancestors would track animals across entire landscapes, walking and jogging at a pace no other species could maintain. We're not the fastest creatures on Earth. We're not the strongest, but we're the ones that never stop. The wolves made their kill quickly and efficiently. The Ani watched in silence, their cultural framework struggling to process what they had witnessed. On their world, predators were ambush hunters. They hid and waited and struck with sudden violence. The concept of a creature that simply refused to quit, that would follow you across endless distances with tireless patience, was the stuff of nightmares. That evening they gathered around a fire at base camp. Had built it herself, striking sparks from steel and stone until the kindling caught. The Ani watched the flames dance with nervous fascination. You control fire, N said quietly. You have tamed the chemical reaction that destroys worlds. We've been doing it for about 1,000,000 years, replied. Fire kept us warm when the ice ages came. It cooked our food so we could extract more nutrients. It scared away predators at night. Fire is basically the foundation of human civilization. She poked at the logs with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up toward the stars. The Ani huddled together, their fur standing on end from the mix of cold air and primal fear. I must ask you something, N said finally. A question that has haunted our species since we first learned about Earth. Go ahead. How did you survive? Your planet has tried to kill you in every way imaginable. Ice ages that froze half the world. Volcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun for years. Asteroids that wiped out most life on the surface. plagues that killed millions of your kind in mere months. How are you still here? How did you not simply go extinct like so many other species?" Was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "We're stubborn," she said. "When the world tried to freeze us, we learned to make fire. When it tried to starve us, we learned to farm. When diseases swept through our populations, we learned medicine. Every single time Earth tried to wipe us out, we found a new way to survive." She looked up at the stars scattered across the dark sky. "Every scar on our planet is a lesson we refuse to forget. Every extinction event made us stronger and smarter and more determined. Earth didn't make us weak by trying to kill us. It made us adaptable. It made us persistent." N nodded slowly. He was beginning to understand something fundamental about this strange species. Humans were not just survivors. They were not just predators. They were the living embodiment of a simple, terrifying principle. They never gave up. No matter how hard the universe pushed, they pushed back harder. No matter how many times they fell, they got back up. No matter how impossible the odds seemed, they found a way. As the fire crackled and the wolves howled in the distance, N made a note in his research journal. It was a simple observation, but one that would reshape how the galaxy understood humanity. "The humans are not the strongest species," he wrote. "They are not the fastest or the most technologically advanced, but they possess something far more dangerous. They possess the absolute refusal to accept defeat. And in a universe where survival belongs to the persistent, that makes them the most formidable creatures we have ever encountered." The fire burned on through the night, and in the morning the humans were already up and preparing for another day, as if the cold and the danger and the exhaustion meant nothing at all. The Dominion had conquered 47 worlds in their march across the galaxy. They were massive reptilian beings, each one standing nearly 3 meters tall with scaled hides that could deflect small weapons fire. Their military was legendary, their tactics ruthless, their mercy non-existent. When the Dominion set its eyes on a system, that system fell. They had been watching the Galactic Union for decades, seeing it as nothing more than a collection of soft, weak species hiding behind treaties and diplomacy. The Union had no real military to speak of, no warrior culture, no appetite for conquest. In the eyes of the commanders, it was simply a matter of time before the Union belonged to them. Then the humans joined. At first the Dominion did not consider the newcomers a threat. Earth was just one world. Humans were small, fragile creatures compared to the mighty. Their ships were primitive, their weapons outdated, their numbers insignificant. The War Council dismissed them as irrelevant. That was their first mistake. When the Dominion fleet entered the Vega system with 70 warships, they expected the Union to surrender or flee. Instead, they found a human fleet waiting for them. Admiral Chris commanded the defense force from the bridge of his flagship, the Defiance. He was 62 years old with a face like weathered stone and eyes that had seen too many battles. His fleet consisted of 23 vessels, most of them smaller and less advanced than the cruisers. By every military calculation, they should have been annihilated in the first hour. "Admiral," his tactical officer reported, "enemy fleet is advancing in standard conquest formation. They're not even bothering with evasive maneuvers." Chris nodded slowly. "They think this will be easy. Let's teach them otherwise." The first engagement was brutal. Weapons tore through human shields and armor, destroying 3 ships in the opening volley. But the human pilots did something the Dominion had never seen before. Instead of retreating from the damage, they pushed forward. Lieutenant Amy commanded the cruiser Endurance from the front line. Her ship was one of the oldest in the fleet, a vessel that should have been decommissioned years ago. When a plasma cannon ripped through her engine room, killing a dozen of her crew, she did not order a withdrawal. "All hands damage report," she called out calmly. "Main engines offline, secondary power failing, hull breaches on decks 4 through 7. Can we still maneuver?" Barely, Captain, thrusters only. Amy looked at the tactical display. The command ship was 3 kilometers ahead, a massive dreadnought that served as the brain of the enemy fleet. If it fell, the entire invasion force would be thrown into chaos. "Set a collision course," she ordered. Her bridge crew stared at her for exactly 1 second. Then they began carrying out the command. On the flagship, the commander watched in disbelief as the crippled human vessel turned toward him. Smoke poured from its wounds. Fire licked along its hull. Half its systems were offline, and it was accelerating. "They're still coming," his sensor officer reported, unable to keep the fear from his voice. "The ship is dying, but they're still coming." "Destroy them." They opened fire with everything they had. More humans died. More systems failed. The Endurance was a flying corpse now, held together by nothing but stubbornness and rage. And it never stopped. Amy gave the evacuation order 30 seconds before impact. Her crew piled into escape pods and launched into the void, trusting that someone would pick them up later. She was the last one off, lingering just long enough to lock the navigation on target. The Endurance struck the dreadnought at full speed. The explosion lit up the entire system like a new star being born. When the light faded, the enemy flagship was gone, and floating in the debris field, a cluster of escape pods drifted peacefully while the survivors inside played cards to pass the time. Admiral sent a message to the remaining fleet. His voice was calm and matter-of-fact, as if he was discussing the weather rather than the deaths of hundreds of beings. "Your command ship is destroyed. Your invasion has failed. I suggest you retreat now while you still have ships left to retreat with." There was a long pause. Then the commander's voice came over the channel, rough with anger and something that might have been fear. "You sacrificed your own people. You threw away lives to destroy 1 ship." Chris leaned forward slightly. "We grew up on a world that throws hurricanes and earthquakes and plagues at us regularly. We've survived 5 mass extinction events. Your ships are scary, but you're not scarier than home." The Dominion fleet retreated. They had lost their flagship, 6 cruisers, and nearly 2,000 warriors. The humans had lost 7 ships and 400 lives. By pure numbers, it was a victory for the. But numbers did not tell the whole story. In the weeks that followed, reports spread through the Dominion military. Stories of human pilots who flew damaged ships into enemy formations. Stories of human Marines who kept fighting with missing limbs. Stories of human commanders who smiled at death and asked if that was the best they could do. The War Council convened to discuss the human problem. For the first time in Dominion history, they were considering retreat from a species they outnumbered 1,000 to 1. "They are not rational," one general argued. "They do not calculate costs and benefits like civilized species. They simply refuse to accept defeat, even when defeat is the only logical outcome." "They feel pain," another observed. "They feel fear. We have seen them mourn their dead. But these things do not stop them. If anything, loss seems to make them fight harder." The Supreme Commander listened to the debate in silence. He had studied the records from Vega, watched the footage of the Endurance's final charge over and over. He had seen the faces of the human crew as they abandoned ship, calm and focused even as fire consumed everything around them. "What are they?" he finally asked. No one had an answer. The Dominion officially from Union space 3 months later. The peace treaty was simple and brief, containing only one notable clause. They agreed never to engage human forces again under any circumstances. Their military database was updated with a new classification. It read, "Species. Do not engage. They are not rational. They do not retreat. They do not fear death. They find it annoying." Admiral retired after the war. He bought a small house near the ocean and spent his days fishing and watching the waves roll in. When reporters asked him about his victory, he shrugged. "We didn't do anything special," he said. "We just did what humans always do. We survived." Amy received a medal and a new command. Her crew still told stories about her final order on the Endurance, the calm voice that had sent them to the escape pods, while she stayed behind to aim a dying ship at an enemy 10 times her size. She never talked about it much. When asked, she would just smile and say that it seemed like the obvious choice at the time. The galaxy watched and wondered. How could such a small species from such a dangerous world be so utterly fearless? How could creatures who felt pain and fear and grief act as if death was merely an inconvenience? They did not understand that humans had been facing extinction since the first of their kind looked up at the stars. They did not understand that Earth had been trying to kill humanity for millions of years. They were just the latest threat, and like all the others before them, they had learned a simple truth. You cannot conquer a species that refuses to be conquered. You cannot break a people who have already survived the unsurvivable. You cannot defeat an enemy who considers death just another problem to solve. The humans had not won the war through superior technology or tactics. They had won by being exactly what there had made them. Stubborn, relentless, unkillable. And absolutely, terrifyingly human. 10 years had passed since the first alien ship landed in the Nevada desert. 10 years since Ambassador stepped onto Earth's soil and felt his environmental suit scream warnings about the hostile atmosphere. 10 years since the galaxy learned that the small blue planet circling an ordinary yellow star had produced something extraordinary. Stood before the Galactic Council now, older and wiser, and carrying the weight of a decade spent trying to understand the most confusing species in the known universe. The Great Chamber was filled with representatives from 100 different worlds, all of them waiting to hear his final report on humanity. He had written and rewritten this speech a dozen times. Every version felt incomplete, unable to capture the full truth of what humans really were. But the council had demanded answers, and he would do his best to provide them. "Distinguished members of the Galactic Council," he began, his voice steady despite the significance of the moment. "I have spent 10 years studying humanity. I have lived among them, worked with them, watched them triumph and fail and pick themselves up again. And I believe I finally understand what makes them unique in all the galaxy." He activated a holographic display showing Earth, that beautiful marble of blue and white and green rotating slowly in the void. "When we first discovered Earth, we classified it as a Class 7, the most dangerous category of planet capable of supporting life. And by every objective measure, that classification was accurate. The atmosphere is a corrosive mix that would poison most species. The gravity is crushing. The radiation is intense. The climate fluctuates wildly between extremes that would kill beings from gentler worlds." Images flashed across the display: volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, hurricanes spinning across oceans, lightning splitting the sky, predators stalking through jungles and deserts and frozen wastelands. Earth has experienced 5 mass extinction events in its history, 5 separate occasions when the majority of life on the planet was wiped out: asteroid impacts, volcanic winters, climate catastrophes. Any one of these events would have ended the story of a lesser species, but humanity survived them all. Paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the chamber. We looked at humanity and saw monsters, persistent predators who chased their prey until it collapsed from exhaustion, beings who consumed neurotoxins for pleasure and called them coffee and alcohol, creatures who kept dangerous animals in their homes and treated them like family members. We saw their history of violence and conflict and assumed that violence was their defining characteristic. He shook his head slowly. "We were wrong." The display changed again, showing different images now. Humans building hospitals, humans rescuing strangers from disasters, humans sharing food with the hungry and medicine with the sick, humans creating art and music and stories that moved even alien hearts to tears. Humanity did not survive there by becoming the deadliest predators on Earth. They survived by becoming the most cooperative species their planet has ever seen. They learned to work together because no individual could survive alone. They developed empathy because caring for the wounded and the weak made the entire group stronger. They created language and culture and shared knowledge because the lessons of one generation could save the next. His voice grew softer. They emerged from hell and chose to be kind anyway. The chamber was silent. Representatives who had once feared humanity now leaned forward, listening with something like wonder. I have seen humans risk their lives to save strangers from other species. I watched a security officer sacrifice his fingers to rescue people he had never met. I witnessed soldiers fly their dying ships into enemy flagships not out of hatred, but because they refused to let innocent worlds fall to conquest. I have eaten at their tables and played with their children and watched them welcome aliens into their homes with warmth and curiosity instead of fear. He pulled up one final image, a human family gathered around a dinner table sharing a meal with Ani guests. The children were laughing. The adults were talking. In the background, a dog slept peacefully by the fire. This is humanity. Not the warriors, though they can fight with terrifying skill. Not the survivors, though they have endured things that would break any other species. This is who they really are. People who have every reason to be monsters and choose to be friends instead. Turned off the display and faced the council directly. The galaxy has spent 10 years afraid of humanity. We have watched them with suspicion and caution, waiting for the violence we assumed was inevitable. But I have lived among them, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that our fear is misplaced. Humans do not want to conquer us. They want to learn from us and share with us and build something greater together. They look at the galaxy and see not enemies to defeat but friends they have not yet met. They dream of a future where all species explore the stars side by side. Yes, they are dangerous. Yes, they can fight and kill and survive things that would destroy anyone else. But they use those abilities to protect, not to dominate. They use their strength in service of others, not in pursuit of power. He took a deep breath. Earth is not just it is a world that demanded the impossible from its children and received something miraculous in return. It created a species capable of terrible violence who chose peace. It forged survivors who used their strength to help others survive. It produced monsters who decided to become gardeners instead. Humanity is the galaxy's weirdest species because they refuse to act like one. They had every excuse to become conquerors, and they became healers. They had every reason to hate the universe, and they fell in love with it instead. Stepped back from the podium. That is my final report. That is the truth about humanity, and I believe with all my heart that the galaxy is better for having them in it. The chamber erupted in discussion, but barely heard it. His work was done. He had spent 10 years trying to explain the inexplicable, and now the galaxy would have to decide for itself what to do with that knowledge. On Earth, Jack watched the broadcast from his home in the mountains. Kate sat beside him, her hair now streaked with gray, her hand warm in his. Through the window they could see their daughter Emma playing in the yard with a Ani child who had come with her parents for a cultural exchange. "He finally gets it," Kate said softly. Jack nodded, watching Emma share her toys without hesitation, her laughter mixing with the musical chiming of her alien friend. "We're just human," he said. "We survive, we adapt, and we try to leave things a little better than we found them." Outside, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, a bird sang, and the strange, beautiful world called Earth continued its endless dance of life and death and renewal. The galaxy had spent a decade trying to understand why humans were so strange, why they feared nothing, why they helped everyone, why they treated the universe like a friend instead of an enemy. The answer was simpler than anyone expected. Humans had grown up on a world that tried to kill them every single day. And instead of becoming bitter and cruel, they had learned to cherish every moment of life. They had learned that kindness was strength and compassion was survival. They had looked into the abyss of extinction and decided that if they were going to exist at all, they would exist as something worth remembering. Earth was not just it was a miracle, and humanity was its greatest gift to the stars.